But this message we are sending to our children is that they have a brain detached from their biological reality, from their genitalia, which is completely and utterly false. It's been debunked. There's no evidence to support this whatsoever. But this ideology was dreamed up by a few individuals. And then in the 70s, Professor Paul McHugh at Johns Hopkins University, which was one of the leading universities pushing this, through a doctor called John Money. Now, Dr. John Money was looking into disorders of sexual development. These are what activists today would call intersex disorders. But nobody is intersex. Nobody is between sexes. Nobody is a third sex. There are people who are born with some disorders. The term intersex is an umbrella term for a variety of disorders of sexual development, all of whom affect males or females. Now, trans activists will try to use this to get you caught up in this discussion, as though they're not all male or female. It's really a diversionary tactic, which we should largely ignore. But on the subject of gender identity, it's got nothing to do with that. Gender identity is teaching that people have a gender, a circular definition, that they have a gender that might be different than their sex. Well, what is gender? We should always be able to define these terms. And what is gender? Leftist university professors have redefined this term. For the longest time, we all used it as a synonym for sex, perhaps a more polite word. But today it means something else entirely. It just means a feeling. Your gender, according to feminist scholars in universities, is whatever you feel it to be. But this, of course, is not true. There is such a thing as reality in the world. And when we become unhinged from reality, all sorts of bad things happen. And where we had this small cohort of mostly men wanting to identify as women, what's happened in the last 15 years in particular is perhaps to buy legitimacy for their own issues, this has been pushed on to kids. And what used to affect maybe 1 out of 30,000 boys 30, 40 years ago, if you look at the statistics, gender identity disorder affected just a tiny handful of the population. This has now exploded. It's a social contagion spread primarily via social media, but from peer to peer and through schools. And it's a social contagion primarily affecting girls, as all social contagions do. And so when we look at these kids at these gender clinics, we find that on average, and this is according to the Tavistock's own data, the Tavistock was the gender clinic in the UK, seeing all of the children. And Dr. Hilary Cass, an eminent pediatrician, conducted a review, a systematic review. It's a 388-page report. I encourage everyone to at least read the summary. But that report, after several years, found that there was no evidence of psychological improvement for any of these kids receiving these drugs and hormones and surgeries. The evidence is scant, it's non-existent, or it's extremely low quality. There was a systematic review done in Sweden. It found the same results. The most thorough review done to date was done this year by the HHS, Department of Health and Human Services in the United States. And it's peer-reviewed. Even the Washington Post said that it was a very balanced report. There's no arguing with these reports. They've gone over all of the peer-reviewed journals, all of the studies, and they've all come to the same conclusion, that there's no evidence this is helping kids. So if it's not helping kids, what are we doing sterilizing kids? These children, according to the Tavistock in the UK, 70% of these kids had 5 or more coexisting mental health comorbidities. They didn't just have 1 or 2 other problems, they had 5 or more. They have autism in likely a majority of cases. I want to say a strong majority for the more mild cases. But we know from the Tavistock that 35% of their patients, out of a sample of 1,069 kids, 35% had moderate to severe autism. These are kids who have suffered sexual abuse in a majority of cases. The president of the American College of Pediatricians tells me personally that he estimates it's about 60% of the kids have had sexual abuse. Anecdotally, if you read the stories of these people, I would say it's even higher, especially if you listen to the stories of detransitioners. These are kids with eating disorders, borderline personality disorder. Oftentimes, according to one older study, 52% of the mothers of these boys had borderline personality disorder themselves, compared to just 6% of the general population. Isn't that interesting? If this is something that's innate, why is it that more than half of the mothers had borderline personality disorder? Because it's not innate. This didn't exist when I was a child. There weren't children going around thinking they were born in the wrong body.